In the heat of the midday sun, the powerhouse Khan sat like a strange sea creature in the bay, its massive belly humming with energy. Powerhouse fed its electricity into the mainland grid, sparking life into flickering streetlights and changing the faint glow of cell phone screens. In mid-2025, the government of Sierra Leone owed Car Powership approximately $70 million for electricity supply. This debt has caused a significant reoccurring power cuts in Freetown, as the company has historically reduced or suspended services to the capital due to the non-payments. With Car Powership providing roughly 80% of the nation's electricity, shutdowns have been crippling. Small businesses affected, hospital care, and disturbed daily life. So my name is Ibiye Camp, as Tom said, and I'm an artist based in London. I'm British Nigerian, and that kind of conversation with West Africa is a huge part of how I explore my practice. I use architectural tools to explore the landscape and technology and post-colonial subjects. I work kind of with my personal connection to these maybe imperialistic qualities that are put into the landscape in West Africa, and I try to kind of understand these tensions and clashes, but also talk about the kind of ripple effect of post-colonial kind of activity and how that affects kind of daily life and the West African diaspora. I studied, originally my BA was in fine arts, which I studied at Central St. Martin's, and I was always very curious of markets and urban spaces and kind of the rituals in public space, and this kind of led on into my practice. And then I decided to take the leap into MA in architecture, which I was very fortunate to study at the Royal College of Art. And this was a moment that really kind of transformed how I understood my practice and my ways of working. It was also a different type of architecture that allowed me to talk about trade and kind of the way that things are circulated through the landscape. I was always very curious of kind of urban landscapes, but I think the word or the subject of architecture I found quite intimidating. But the Royal College of Art, the way that they were kind of exploring architecture allowed me to kind of see how I navigated through space and how I understood our connection, particularly my connection to the landscape. I ended up actually then running a studio after I left the Royal College, and then that's where it led me into being a type of educator, kind of sharing ways of working with technology. And today I run a studio with Rihanna Daliwell and Emmy Batterach in Eindhoven at the Design Academy in Eindhoven, where we again talk about public space and this kind of clash of technology and infrastructure. So when I was studying at the Royal College of Art, this is where kind of the kind of purpose of my practice and what the kind of input is was really understood. I was in a studio with cooking sections as my tutors. If you don't know cooking sections, they're a wonderful collective. They were actually nominated for the Turner Prize. I think it was in 2021 or 2022. And we were in a studio which was called Banking Nature, Speculation of Disappearing Spaces. And then in my second year of my master's, I was in a studio that was called Data Matter, Digital Networks, Data Centers, Post-Human Institutions, which was led by Marina Otero, Ippolito Palestini, and Camille Decker. And this was my kind of thesis project, which really set the kind of visual language and the research trajectory for me. I'm going to talk to you about 4 projects today, which have really led me to the work that is presented in the Bonington Gallery. So the first was what I produced as my thesis project, and it was titled Data the New Black Gold. When looking at the kind of fibre optic cables which kind of provide internet to West Africa, I would map where these fibre optic cables came from, and there is a kind of a significant route of the transatlantic slave trade routes which are still kind of represented in where the fibre optic cables appear today. Reading James Bridle, who is an artist and writer, he talks about how these routes came from the transatlantic slave trade, then went into kind of the mail routes, and then they kind of turned into where the fibre optic cables are. And he just said, this is kind of another form of imperialism. It just kind of changed the infrastructure level. And so the readings with James Bridle kind of really kind of stemmed some ideas for me around how I wanted to explore various types of data centres that sit in the West African landscape. We had a case study, which is a really brilliant way to kind of begin a research practice. And so I was exploring Main 1, which is one of the main data centres in West Africa. And this is based in Lekki, which is a kind of almost like a kind of smart city kind of extension of Lagos. And when I was researching the ideas around the data centre, I was just curious about how a data centre kind of sat in the landscape. When a data centre needs so much power and water, what does that mean in Nigeria, where power and water aren't so accessible? And so I looked into the history, particularly where my mother is from, in the Niger Delta. There is very kind of renowned amount of oil, which is kind of cultivated and extracted from the landscape. And it made me think about how the population in Nigeria makes it a space of kind of data cultivation. And I felt as though it was like a similar type of way of extracting from a country, similar to the kind of movement of the kind of slave trade to the mail routes, then to the fibre optic cables. This was like another type of transition that went from oil to data for me. And when I was looking at the way that oil was extracted from the land, it was done in a very clumsy manner. You can see how oil pipelines just kind of like go across the landscape without regard for citizens' kind of land and space. And they're also kind of done in such a precarious way that then oil bunkering then appears. And I've kind of went through many readings in 2019 when I was studying this to understand that actually they create these very clumsy infrastructures to make purposeful kind of leaks in order to kind of control the landscape. It's done in a way that it could be kind of done in a more pristine way by the oil companies, but it's actually a way of control. And there's many kind of really interesting papers that talk about these purposeful leaks that happen. And it's a way of kind of keeping citizens in a state of kind of, not necessarily terror, but maybe terror is the word that I kind of would say, because there are explosions and all sorts of sicknesses that happen from these oil spills. So then I kind of would walk, with my work, I would kind of move back and forth between what happened with the oil and then what happened with the data. And looking into the main 1 data center, I found that it needed 99.99 power uptime, or maybe that's just what the company advertised, because maybe that kind of tiny kind of percentage might kind of suggest that there might not be power, but you need to have power constantly in order to kind of facilitate the companies that would use the data center. And it also kind of needs such a huge amount of water as well. And so they have all of these overseas corporations that also are involved in the data center. And when I was researching Main One, I found that there was actually a data leak that had been reported. This kind of graphic on the left is what a data leak looks like. And it was reported that the data from the data center had been leaked by a Russian company. And there was actually, it was just reported that it was a mistake that happened. But actually, when a data leak happens by citizens, it's seen as criminal. And when it's done by an overseas corporation, it's seen as a mistake. When actually it probably was some sort of suspicious criminal activity that would have happened. And again, this makes me think about the oil bunkering and the oil leaks. And when it happens by individuals, they're called kind of vandals. But actually, when it's done by the oil companies, again, it keeps people in a state of control of the citizens. So with my project, I wanted to kind of think about public space and public kind of moments of data exchange. And so I wanted to use scanning software in order to document moments of data exchange for myself. So that was where I would go every day to top up my mobile phone. I would go to this mobile phone kiosk, and I wanted to kind of create like a photogrammetry study of this action. But actually, when I started to use photogrammetry in these market spaces, I actually found that these market spaces are so ephemeral and so organic that actually they can't be captured in the way that I was hoping or kind of anticipating I could like kind of capture these actions. So what we're looking at here is actually a really busy roundabout where there would be like kind of cars and kickers kind of moving through and motorbikes. But actually all you do see is that the kind of advertising which says 4G is here, which is a mobile phone advert. But actually it's a very, very busy kind of space. And it made me think about what type of kind of data kind of can be controlled by the citizens. And I realized that it's the spaces within the markets that are lit in a particular way, or because they have so much movement and disruption, it actually disturbs the scans which I was trying to create. So this is another example of a wheelbarrow that was kind of being used to sell oranges, and just the way that things are lit and the kind of informal kind of elements of scanning in such a kind of busy environment didn't really allow the kind of total forms of the meshes to appear. And so I thought for my thesis, I started to kind of gather all of these kind of scenarios of various different typologies of markets in the kind of surrounding areas that I would travel in Freetown and Sierra Leone. And I started to kind of create a digital city, something that could be understood and only kind of activated by people that actually use these spaces. I should actually say that I also would create these scans in a very informal manner. I would just kind of render them on the lowest setting, so they would be like produced while I was in Freetown. So again, they don't use a huge amount of energy in order to produce them. And this kind of created this voided digital city. And I found that because I was scanning spaces that were kind of really highly kind of contrasted in light, this created like a type of malfunction of the scan, and it kind of created this voided space as well. And I feel as though the voids kind of highlight the kind of inequalities in this like type of scanning software in this landscape. I'm just going to play a bit of this film. So I actually ended up going back to Freetown with a 3D model of one of the scans I had made back to the kiosk, of the mobile phone vendor, to show the form that I had made. And that was quite an interesting kind of circular moment as well, because these spaces never stay the same. You know, every day the setup is different. There are different vendors. There are different kind of stalls behind that also kind of change the typology and the language of the street. And that's also what I love about kind of this manner of working, and the idea of these spaces kind of just having their own rituals and having their own control. That's something that can't be like kind of captured the way that Google Maps would like kind of capture a space. You'll never be able to navigate a Google Maps car through a market the way that kind of vendors and individuals that are selling things kind of navigate through the market. And so I saw that as like something that is like really kind of resilient to being seen or being read by technology. And I really enjoy and welcome the glitches and voids that happened in that documentation process. So the second project I want to speak about that kind of really informed the way that I work today is the Sacred Forest of Ethiopia. This was a commissioned work from the Sharjah Architecture Triennial. That was the first Architecture Triennale in 2019 that was curated by Adrian Lahoud, who is the Dean of the Royal College of Art and fantastic researcher, director, who really kind of supported my practice. So this particular kind of way of working also kind of embraced the kind of errors and the way that certain landscapes are kind of resistant to being read and being kind of captured in a digital format. So I was actually kind of commissioned and given the theme of working with the Sacred Forests of Ethiopia. And from doing my research, I found that there had been a huge amount of deforestation encouraged in kind of the communism kind of era in Ethiopia. This was in 1974 to 1991, where the government kind of nationalized the land. So this is where the landscape went from 45% forest to 5%. And in the Anhama region, there are about 800 sacred churches, sacred forests that surround these churches, as you can see. And the churches and the forests have managed to kind of not be kind of a victim of deforestation, because they are seen as like heaven on earth. Like the forests around are kind of an extension of the church. So I think there's so many kind of really interesting aerial imageries of this, where they kind of look like archipelagos, kind of floating islands in this kind of sparse landscape. And so what I wanted to do, I wanted to, the Triennale was all speaking about deforestation, colonialism and labor and all of these really, really crucial subjects. And so I wanted to kind of think about how I can kind of reflect on what are the results of the rituals that happen and the resilience of the landscape of the forest and how they've been managed to be maintained. And so I ended up kind of going to Ethiopia and having a really curious time, because I wasn't quite sure what to expect. And what I found is that there's these kind of multiple zones and spaces around the forest. So there's the kind of neighbouring villages, and then there's the kind of farmlands, and then there's the forest itself, and then there is the kind of the church. And so I kind of felt like there were all of these kind of various different zones that kind of operated in different ways as an extension of the church. And I also found that once you were kind of in the landscape, the aerial imagery was quite misleading, actually. It really kind of showed this, in the research I did before arriving in Ethiopia, you see these like huge kind of sparse lands and then the kind of concentrated forest. But actually, I would say that there's quite a different experience when you're on the ground in these spaces, and it was really quite a very green experience. Of course, this is in the forest itself, but I feel as though, again, there was a kind of, there's a distance, is what I'm saying, from the aerial imagery. And I really enjoy with working with scanning software and photogrammetry, you actually are walking through these spaces yourself. So it's not like having a drone, and it's not like having a kind of master view of a site. When I'm working in this way, I'm working from foot, and I'm working from kind of holding a camera in my hand. And I think that's very important to how these scans are produced. I also kind of wanted to lean into the errors that might happen when creating these scans in such an organic space. And there's an option in Agosoft Metashape, which is one of the softwares that I use, where you can, where data might be kind of like voided, you can actually select it to extrapolate and kind of create its own geometry. And so this is an example of a voided kind of scan that has like kind of like this space above, and it's kind of like slightly just disjointed, but when it's extrapolated, it creates this kind of like sweeping motion, which I found was quite interesting, and also kind of created its own type of surface. And so when I was thinking about these zones, the zones of the neighbouring villages, the zones of the farmland, to the forest, to inside the church, I then started to explore these various different forms that these zones created with this extrapolated model making process. These were made with a type of kind of powder that turns into a kind of resin plaster when 3D printed, and it literally prints also the colour of the scan a little bit like an inkjet printer. So that's kind of what you're seeing here. And as you kind of went through the space, the kind of spaces that were more organic kind of created these bubbles and enclosures. And I think this was also a really interesting way to show how they were actually kind of closing themselves in. So you had to kind of look through even the holes of the 3D models, whereas the spaces outside, which was like maybe the neighbouring villages kind of area, were kind of more kind of open. And so I ended up making an installation of about 28 models that kind of all had their own geometry, and the closer you kind of got into the forest and the more kind of organic the kind of forest was, the more it kind of created these enclosures that were kind of resistant to being seen. And so this was the installation that was presented at the Sharjah Architecture Triennial. It was also accompanied by kind of film work and sound that was made by Emi Batarach, who's one of my collaborators today. And these were some of the kind of details of the models. So this was like a very interesting process where before I had worked mainly with film, and this was like kind of seeing it in a kind of 3D model making form. And I really found this process, very organic. The only thing I'd say that wasn't organic and something that I felt quite critical of myself was actually the kind of texture and the plaster of the model. So that was something that sat with me, though. I was like, if I worked like this again, I kind of felt as though using this type of inkjet model was interesting, but it also didn't kind of sit right. And I wanted to kind of continue to work and continue to think about how I can even, with my work, I'm challenging the scan, but I want to also try to challenge the form of model making, and why does model making have to kind of follow this quite pristine kind of straightforward representation, which leads me into my next project. which was called Remaining Threads. And this was developed in 2021. It was initially kind of commissioned. It was commissioned by the Shanghai Art Biennale, where Marina Otero was one of the curators, and it was called Bodies of Water, and it was all about kind of the circulation of goods and trade and ritual. So I was really kind of excited by this, and because it was in Shanghai, there was also like a kind of conversation with work that was also in China. So I thought it would be interesting to explore textiles. As I mentioned before, my family, my mother's side of the family, were from the Niger Delta, a village called Buguma. And in Buguma, we have a fabric which we wear, which is actually imported. It's a imported madras. And madras, if you don't know, madras is a plaid material, which is this kind of like checker material that initially it comes from India, but madras has almost become a bit of a symbol of the transatlantic. It's worn in Asia, it's worn in the Caribbean, it's worn in Africa. And madras fabric is imported to Buguma in Nigeria. And we have a practice where we pull the thread out of the madras material in order to kind of reclaim it. And it turns into like a new condition. We pull the thread so it becomes slightly transparent, and it becomes almost like a little bit more sheer and delicate, so you can create your own textile pattern in that existing plaid. And the process of pulling the thread is called pelete, which means cut thread in Kalabari. And then, so the new material, so the process is called pelete, and the new material, which these ladies are wearing here, they're wearing it as a wrapper, is called injury. So this is like the new material is injury, and this is a Kalabari material. And I love the fact that this has kind of gone through a process of being imported, but then also kind of being reclaimed by this practice. And this is an example of some of the pelete kind of patterns that you can make, and a lot of them kind of symbolize the water spirits of the Niger Delta, because we have loads of wonderful water spirits. And you can see that this is a photograph of a woman kind of pulling the thread, doing the pelete, making the injury, and making kind of cuts just with a simple kind of not scissors, I've forgotten the word, but yeah, she's kind of cutting the thread here. So in recent years, my auntie actually has a shop in Port Harcourt, in the Niger Delta, that sells fabric, and she told me how this fabric is now being produced in China, and the process of pelete doesn't happen anymore. It's kind of done by machine in Guangzhou, and then imported into Nigeria. So like this has kind of replaced the hand of the craftswoman. And finding out this information when I was thinking about ideas around kind of labour and trade and these circulations, I thought that it would be really important for me to try to understand the process of pelete and start to kind of hand pick fabric. So this is an example of one of my mother's injury fabrics previously. And this is an example of a fabric from my auntie's shop, which is kind of already kind of picked or already designed to have the impression of being picked, and has been imported to Nigeria. So I kind of had an idea of picking fabric from Guangzhou, so a kind of plaid cloth from Guangzhou, and then cutting it myself. And so I have to say that this took such a long time to kind of sit and pick the thread kind of individually, kind of, and yeah. And so with this project, I wanted to kind of create this mixed media kind of study of a ceremony, a Kalabari ceremony of the masquerades, where people would wear, like men and women wear the lapa. In Nigeria, you say rapper, not lapa. That's my Sierra Leonean input. But in these ceremonies, men and women wear the wrappers, and so I wanted to kind of have a study of a masquerade ceremony, but then also I kind of accompanied it with this kind of visual essay of a kind of hand picking fabric, and it was a 2-channel kind of installation, which one was a masquerade that was slightly more kind of gamified and in a kind of format that looks more like a game engine, and then the other was a scanned kind of representation of this pelle-tebite process. And I was trying to emphasize this clash between the traditional hand and the input of the machine, and the machine replacing the hand. And yes, this was originally shown at the Shanghai Arts Biennale, and then I then showed it at the Berlin Transmediale festival, which was really wonderful. And this is where they kind of showed the machine cut cloth, and then along with my hand pulled cloth. And this is where I started to kind of be quite interested in the shadows that were created, and thinking about maybe this could be a practice or a kind of vernacular way of representing mark making or model making in the landscape that really speaks to kind of the ancestral knowledge of how we kind of tell stories in the landscape. And this is another example of some of the kind of hand-picked experiments that I did that was also supported by the work presented in Shanghai. So yeah, this leads me to how I got to layt. So I don't know if everyone has seen the exhibition, but yeah, I originally, so like I said, I'm Nigerian, but my partner's Sierra Leonean, so we actually spend a lot of time in Sierra Leone, where we make work and spend kind of 3-4 months out of the year there. And in 2018 is when I was first told about the power ship by a friend, and he said, "Oh, the reason why we have power all the time because we don't have a generator, and so we do rely on the national grid." And he said, "Oh, the reason why we have more power at the moment is because the election is happening, and MAAT has arranged for the ship to come." And yeah, once he said it, I realized that there was this massive ship that was like there at the shore. And this is a view that I took in 2018. So this was like during the time that I was writing my dissertation and really curious about previous types of histories of imperialism in the West African landscape. So I actually wrote about this in my dissertation. And when I started this conversation with Tom, I really kind of wanted to kind of go back to kind of thinking about these car power ships. I should say that the car power ship is a Turkish company that designs and builds and operates these global fleets, and the power ship is a floating plant essentially, and it's kind of the idea is it to kind of generate electricity to countries that are in need. And their slogans on their website are very, very transparent. They kind of say that they're there for only meant to be there for a certain amount of time, but actually, with more kind of knowledge and as time has gone past, you see that they're not actually temporary. They're actually something that's going to be there for quite a long time. And there's also something that the country becomes more and more reliant on these ships. So this is a video of the ship in Freetown, which was taken in 2025. So, like I said, the country state, they have this mission to kind of reduce energy poverty and support countries, but actually it becomes something that the the country becomes almost like crippled by the debt that is kind of built up around it. So this individual ship is actually, I found out from Gautier, who is the wonderful anthropologist who I had a conversation with in the handouts that are available with the show. I actually found out that this ship, which is called the Karadeniz Power Dogan Bay, was the first of the power ships from the car power company. And it's equipped with, kind of a dual kind of natural gas and heavy oil fuel. It was first deployed in Brasa in Iraq, and then kind of came to Freetown late 2017, and it's been there ever since. And it's kind of suspended power multiple times because of the unpaid bills, and it also kind of has become a bit of a character to the city, where it's facing Freetown. You can see it from all different angles of the shore, and it's become almost kind of like a landmark in the landscape. And I found it quite interesting that when I started to concentrate on the ship properly, I did realise that often people are watching it from many different kind of viewpoints, whether it's Crew Bay, where this was photographed, or whether it's in town, or And so I continued to kind of explore what these power ships meant, particularly to the West African landscape. I should say as well that they're global. They're all over the world in countries that need them. But actually, they're very specific now to West Africa and the coast because of the kind of idea of them being on water. A lot of coastal countries have them now. And so I planned to go to Ghana to go see another ship that was there. And this was, in my planning, I wanted to visit one that was in Tema. And as you can see on Google Earth, it was there. And when I arrived in Tema with my my collaborator, Rihanna Daliwa, we kind of walked around the fishing area, the fishing market in Tema, asking everyone, where's this ship? I kind of felt like it might have a similar presence to the way that it did in Freetown. And everyone was like, oh, okay, it's just around the corner, it's just around the corner. And like literally we walked everywhere, and I realized that it wasn't there. And it's also kind of, my Ghanaian friends kind of laughed a little bit because it's very kind of part of the Ghanaian nature not to tell you that something can't work or something's wrong. So everyone just kept saying it's just around the corner rather than saying that it's just not there. So that was also something quite interesting to learn along the way. So yeah, this is my photograph on the right of realizing that actually where I thought it was at the end of this pier, it had actually gone. And I think this moment also resonated with the fact that these things kind of can move, and it's that kind of indeterminacy, whether it's going to be there, whether it's going to not be there, like what's going to happen to this ship, this power plant that can essentially leave at any time or maybe not leave. And it's very kind of precarious, these kind of contracts, and actually it's not as transparent as the car power company make it out to be. So I ended up taking a small plane to Takoradi in Ghana with Rihanna, where we found that the ship had actually moved because it needed to move to where the natural gas was. And so here it is on a Navy base in Takoradi, and it's not how I expected at all to be. Again, this is like the situation of traveling to site and having these site-specific projects. It's like it's so different when you're on the ground. So it was on a Navy base, and we couldn't kind of get close to it, not in the way that we did in Freetown. And Freetown literally kind of circulated and waved to the workers who were travelling onto the boat, but actually there was a real kind of distance to travelling to the car power ship here. And it was quite fascinating as well. There were, in the Navy base, there was also all of these other ships that were there. It was Japanese ships from the Second World War that had then kind of been recycled and kind of used for Ghana's Navy. And I found that also to be quite an interesting kind of connection to kind of how, things get circulated and kind of maybe even end up on the West African shore. And there's some details of the pylons which are quite kind of otherworldly, that are kind of on these stands at the sea. And so, yeah, the infrastructure was very different in Ghana to the way it was in Freetown. And so, yeah, from this, this is what kind of stemmed a lot of my research. And, right now it's in Ghana, Senegal, Guinea, Gambia, Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau. But there's also conversation of the car power ship appearing maybe in Nigeria, in Gabon, in the Cameroon. And, again, this is something that is becoming like a symbol of the West African landscape, which I'm very curious by. So these are some of the point clouds and studies that I made from traveling around the power ships. These ones are from Freetown, and this is one from Ghana. And again, I was fascinated by the proximity, the kind of space of where the ship is to kind of how it kind of meets everyday life, and where it kind of meets the land, and how it kind of has become a typology of the West African landscape. And these are studies of how kind of the piers became a kind of a viewpoint, or a way of accessing kind of a vision of the power ship. And this is a study from Crew Bay in Freetown. So I kind of was thinking to myself, after my visits, I questioned, what is my take on the ships? What is kind of the purpose of documenting them? And again, it's quite similar to walking through the markets in the Dayton Black Gold work. Is that I feel like this is a really kind of crucial kind of time of where the governments are kind of creating these contracts with these overseas corporations, and kind of making these deals which allow kind of maybe deaths to happen that do kind of affect daily life. When I was in Freetown, there was a power cut, and often the power cuts are like a moment of reflection, and a moment where you have a little bit of calmness, because it's often so loud in the centre of town where we live. And you can kind of hear your neighbours kind of talking. And I heard one of our neighbours say, "Layt they come." And I thought this was a really optimistic and quite profound kind of just thing to say, because there's so much hearsay around the ships. There's so much kind of conversation of it might go, it might leave, this debt has happened, and there's been moments of blackout for so long. And I just loved the fact that this woman who lived on L Street said, "Layt they come." And so I wanted to make a response to this moment in time, this documentation that really kind of focuses on the daily practices, daily life of the proximity around the ships, and talk about maybe the resilience, talk about the kind of, the ancestral kind of knowledge and storytelling of kind of individuals around the ship. I should also say there's also like a lot of slang that's happened around the ships. So it's called like the powerhouse or the power body. In Ghana, there's also a tree word, which is damso, which means light off. And I think that's really interesting, kind of focusing in on how these kind of infrastructures affect daily life and affect the way that people talk and become like a symbol or character to the city. So yeah, I really started instead of just kind of working with point cloud studies to look at the landscapes. I also kind of started to look at more domestic situations too. And just from the studies that I was making, there was like a fabric quality to the way that I was using the point clouds. And these are just kind of initial sketches that I made. And I've kind of felt that so it could be quite interesting to have a digital but also have like an analogue of looking at the landscapes. And I mentioned that I had this frustration with my Sacred Forests of Ethiopia project, where, you know, the 3D prints were this plaster and was something that was like slightly chemical and slightly like artificial to talk about something so organic. And so with the idea of material, I started to work with the kola nuts. And the kola nuts is a, you know, it's a nut that is, you know, only grown in certain landscapes in West Africa. I believe it's grown in Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast, and Nigeria. And the kola nut creates, it's a caffeine, it's kind of a psychedelic. It's also seen as a blessing. When there's a marriage, you bring a kola nut and you have an exchange of kola nuts, but also it's used as a dye. And so I started working with dyeing fabric when I was in Freetown, thinking that this could be quite an interesting surface to work or create some sort of model making from you know, again, something that is traditional to the landscape of West Africa, something that is kind of like maybe ancestral knowledge, and something that is like maybe what I consider a true kind of manner of model making in that particular landscape. And then I started to utilize the point clouds and kind of think of the point clouds as a type of void and a type of way of reclaiming the fabric again, similar to the pelletebite idea of cutting away the fabric. I utilized kind of the point cloud and cut into the fabric. The fabric, which I also see as the wrapper, lapa kind of way of showing the textile that people would wear around their waist. And yeah, it kind of created this really interesting language, which I feel as though could represent scenes of everyday life, which I was trying to kind of celebrate, and things like these were moments that I wanted to transcribe and I wanted to represent about this particular moment of infrastructural life. And so yeah, these were some tests which I produced when I was in Freetown. And yeah, there was also the idea around kind of when there was light, or when there wasn't light, or there was like some shadow kind of created. I wanted to kind of play around with these more analog representations. And that's kind of like how we came to these scenes. So this is one of the point cloud studies, which then becomes kind of inscribed through laser cutting into the fabric that you see in layt. And yeah, I really wanted the kind of everyday kind of life to be really the thing that was celebrated. I know that I did kind of monumentalize the ship as this character, like in the exhibition, but I really wanted to kind of champion the everyday kind of ideas around storytelling, ideas around kind of city life. And also with the pier, it was really important to kind of also have that as an offering, or like a kind of choice of viewing the work. You could either kind of view it from the pier, the way that people would look at the Doggin Bay from the pier, or you could also be invited to walk in to the work. I'm going to leave it with a little clip from the film Glow, which was presented in the film, and this is a kind of child's tale, kind of fantastical kind of idea around the ship being this visitor, being like a kind of stranger to the shore, and speculating on what that would have been for the children that would have seen this ship come. I'll leave it there.
One morning, 3 children sat on the edge of a fishing boat, anchored at the shore. They watched the sea. The sky was heavy with heat. The tide was low. A humming began to tremble from the distance. They noticed something unfamiliar. It looked half ship, half machine. Bronze stripes from the oil stained its belly. Black cables, wiry and sharp hairs, reached for the land. Energy began to pulse through the power lines, traveling to spinning fans, blinking screens, making bright light. The world sipped at it, thirsty. Water tumbled from the visitor like a waterfall, plunging and tumbling. A man began to push the visitor away. He slowly shifted them with his bare hands. He increased his pace with an oar, paddling, pushing, faster and faster. He propelled so hard that they flew into the sky. The 2 of them passed through the clouds into the heated abyss, gliding to an infinite depth.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ibiye. That was great. It's really nice to sort of take it from looking back at sort of past work and then bringing it right through to the show, which is just next door in the space. I'm really keen to sort of welcome any questions that Ibiye for Ibiye that anyone in the room might have. Have we got we haven't got a floating mic? No, okay, it's not working. So you might just have to sort of shout your question out a little bit loud if you do have a question. Is anyone? Yeah, we've got one at the back there. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much. It's absolutely amazing to see how your projects connect and how you sort of take completely different themes and just develop them. I was fascinating to see how you were talking about what I was saying, just like reclaiming material. Yes, when those ladies were working with material, and then you were using the same word when you were saying that you were doing the last project and cutting into that cloth that we're using for babies, and it's like reclaiming it again. I just wonder, for me, actually, it's not reclaiming that material, because I can see that through that material you sort of destroy it in order to show the images of things that in future probably will destroy that future generation, and this material won't be able to be used for those babies. So for me, it's quite a juxtaposing thing here, not reclaiming actually, but what do you think?
Thank you for your question. I think that potentially it's not the correct word, I would say, but I think what I'm trying to do, I guess what I'm trying to do is try to champion a way of working, which is to kind of make a voided fabric. The way that the Calabari women pull the fabric, yes, the fabric becomes less strong. You know, it's kind of challenging the integrity of the fabric by cutting and pulling thread. And so, yeah, I do agree that there is like a kind of destroyed element to also cutting into the fabric, and it is there's two ways of working with wrapper lappers, is that they could be used for fashion, and they are also kind of used for like kind of holding your child as well. And so there is like a kind of conversation that it might kind of challenge the integrity of the practice, but I am also seeing these formats as a way of storytelling and mark making and creating like ancestral knowledge. So the way that the every family in Buguma have their own injury, their own kind of cloth, almost like kind of Scottish kind of kilts, how you have your own kind of family kilt. It's the same in Buguma, and I think maybe there were actually Scottish kind of occupation there for a little bit, which is probably why we also kind of my mother, who's Calabari, her surname's Douglas, so that's also kind of a suggestion of like, you know, the Scottish influence. But it's fashion as well, so this kind of language of like, I wanted to kind of create a language with kind of this point cloud imagery, and I'm using the concept of inscribing knowledge into the fabric in order to kind of make these symbols of this moment in time. So yeah, as an artist, it makes sense to me. As a designer, yeah, it's probably not the most functional thing to do, but it's a way of kind of creating a new language rather than 3D printing a form of the ships. I feel like kind of creating a voided language into the fabric makes sense to this landscape. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree with
Yeah.
that. I'm saying that it's just like a different dimension to it as well. When you see through this fabric those ships, and you just think about the future as well, the country is so dependent on those things that it could actually destroy the future of those young children that they were up previously. So it's just like a new dimension to your work as well. That, it's, I just wonder whether you wanted to show that as well, or is it just like I'm reading into it something extra?
I'm so intrigued, like, because I want to have a bit more of a optimistic kind of look into it. I really want Layt Come to not be just about the death and the sadness. I kind of want it to be like, this is a chance to talk about these temporalities and talk about strength, talk about the certainty of a mother wrapping her child is always going to kind of continue, is one of the metaphors that I want people to kind of leave. But I also appreciate that this is also something that is also true and real, that there's a delicacy and there's a fragility to them as well, that they might fall apart. So yeah, it's to be interpreted, and yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm really interested maybe about like the process that you go through, like, because I think the end result is so interesting, but I'd kind of like to know like the behind the scenes of like how you do that, because from what I saw, that there's so much right there, from the model making to the kind of experimental essay that you did, like just the photo geometry. I feel like that's so interesting. I would love to like know like how you navigate that, especially depending on like the outcome that you kind of come to, like how you kind of weave your way through that. And that's something that I really like to understand a bit more.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. What can I say? I do think that drawing's really important for me, even though, yes, I work with film and textile. I'm really kind of curious of storytelling, and so the kind of tool of drawing and storyboards is the main kind of way of navigating these various different concepts. I'm also even though I love to read, I'm quite dyslexic, and so the visuals are so important to me. And I think as though that is where the visual essays are important. I feel like the visual essays allow certain kind of tensions and things to come to fruition in the work that I maybe can't articulate too much.
That's what I got. That's what
Yeah.
kind of felt like. There was like a little like quiet moments, but then like the sound is so like, important as well. Because that's what I got from that. Like it wasn't solely just what you see, but also what you hear and how that makes you kind of feel. I think that was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I do think that there are certain because I'm also working with very delicate subjects. I like the way at Point Cloud is like it's just a trace of a space. It's not necessarily a really kind of like detailed kind of study that reveals too much about the subjects, the landscape, and the location. So I think what the field recordings also do is also lend another kind of perspective of sound, allowing you to kind of also imagine the scene, even though what you're looking at is very kind of voided and abstract as well. But yeah, I think in the process of like kind of working with such mixed medias, I do think that the kind of core of tying them all together for me in that process is drawing, allowing there to kind of be a current narrative and point of interest. Yeah. Hi.
It's really interesting in talking about the demand for electricity in coastal. I don't know if you're aware that there's similar things happening in this country with offshore wind farms. In Lincolnshire, which is a really poor county, there's a lot of deprivation there, that they're getting the electricity onshore is a real problem. And when the Danish companies were originally starting, they dig it under the ground. That's been run by the British government. It's all going above ground, and they're going to be running huge pylons across the landscape against what the actual people want. Some people there are viewing it as very much the southeast of England, getting the power it requires, the wealth it has to buy large cars, which have big electric demands and so on.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. There's a definite kind of coastal connection.
Definitely. Yeah, and I actually think there was a project that someone developed at the RCA that was like looking at these types of infrastructures and what they were kind of selected in landscapes that were kind of poorer income, and it is like this kind of repetition and looking at typologies and not kind of acknowledging the kind of citizens kind of home and situation. So yeah, I actually would really love to kind of also bring attention to these type of infrastructures that are in the UK as well. It's quite funny because I think I often use the sites in West Africa because I just want to kind of continue my connection, and it takes me back to go see family and everything. But I do see that there is urgency, and kind of this is happening also in our home turf as well. But yeah, it's a really important point.
Yeah, and we're in a much more advantageous position. We have constant flow of electricity, but the country doesn't buy it from other countries.
Yeah.
It's the only country in the world that power spike because we have electric kettles.
Mm.
And the power supply companies watch when EastEnders finishes.
Ah, yeah.
Then buy it from France or Europe. So the spike happens.
That's
Because it's
fascinating.
not run by commercial television, it can flex its time.
Yeah.
EastEnders.
That is fascinating. I should also say that Ghana, they also have a dam where they overproduce electricity, and then they have to kind of sell it to neighbouring countries, but there's no way of storing it, and that's why they have a power ship. I think that's also why Ghana are so hush-hush about the ship compared to Sierra Leone, because they're actually quite embarrassed that it's, you know, they have to have the ship, even though Ghana has always been known for having this dam and being able to be kind of self-sufficient.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just wondering, I really enjoy your exhibition in the gallery. It's very engaging and culturally meaningful. And is there anything else, like some research going on, and any of your future direction, what kind of works or media you want to try in the future?
I'm actually going to go to Senegal in February, because there's a car power ship there, and I want to kind of explore this car power ship. It's actually a hydro ship, and I don't know what that means. So again, it's like a different type of typology. So I have plans to actually continue this research and gain a better understanding of it, and maybe a better kind of case study of showing the delicacy and depths. I think that's something that's quite important. There was meant to be a ship that was going to be deployed in South Africa, but South Africa were very good in kind of protesting this and actually stopping it. And they wrote to their governor of environmental kind of justice, and managed to kind of stop this from happening, because they now know from the West African countries the debt that this creates. And so I'd love to speak to more kind of researchers and geographers and anthropologists about how we can try to make, you know, kind of more awareness, because it's also stopping more eco-friendly ways of creating power as well. And so I really hope to kind of continue this and create more vernacular language that represents the landscape in order to try to get these stories to travel. Yeah.
I'm interested to know why the government's spending so much money on these temporary things that could go to slightly longer term solutions of their own. I don't know if in talking to local people whether you got any sense of why the government's doing such short term things like that, as opposed to, in fact, I mean, what's the debt you mentioned? $70 million or something?
Yeah.
I mean, that would go a long way to building some wind farms.
Totally agree. I think it's short-term solutions. So the car power ship initially came because there was an election happening, and so a lot of it is kind of campaigns. I believe even in Godfrey, the anthropologist I spoke to, she also said that the car power ship was also part of the campaign for the Ghanaian president as well. And then, so they get introduced to kind of get people on side, because it seems as though they're having a solution. And then it becomes something that they then become reliant on, because it kind of exacerbates all of these issues. I wish that they would focus on more sustainable kind of resolutions. And if you read the conversation I have with Gauthier, initially they start off as 5-year plans, but actually it ends up probably being it's probably going to be like 20, 30 years that they'll be part of the landscape. Yeah.
Maybe it's the compactness of the solution as well. I guess you've got it all in one ship, as opposed to having to develop and build a sort of big infrastructure and a supply route and everything else that comes with it. So there's probably something quite convenient about the idea that this kind of comes up and just plugs in, and then which might make
it's the usual problem of politicians and short-term solutions.
Yeah, and that sort of turnover of personnel that sort of happens. Those photos though of the sort of pipes and the cabling that just runs straight through small villages and communities is crazy. Yeah. It's quite frightening. I just want to quickly come back to the role of drawing in your practice and the. I'm sat down so casually here. It's like I'm some sort of lounge singer or something.
Say lounging.
There's that. I guess there's that idea because you have this. You have your BA. Your degree was in fine art, and your master's in architecture. And I guess there's that idea of drawing being this idea about sort of the creation of space. Drawing for you seems to be this idea of sort of understanding space, or this idea of sort of capturing moments, and you release that really lovely sort of set that on your social media of a set of drawings that you've done in the lead up to the exhibition next door, and it's lovely to see that because that was obviously like a behind the scenes working that you were doing. But yeah, can you just speak a little bit to you've already mentioned drawing, but just go into a little more detail about how that works in your practice, throughout your practice, but also it feels like even the sort of generation of point cloud seems to also be this idea of drawing or understanding an environment through mark making. Well, you could say a bit more about that.
Yeah, like I guess I'm not like that most like kind of highly skilled sketcher, but I think it just there's a way of kind of getting this feverish kind of moment kind of out of your head. Again, I like I said, I love storytelling, and I'm not brilliant with words, so I feel as though this is like the kind of most efficient way of maybe understanding these connections. And I guess with what I've learnt from architecture school as well, these kind of like formats of plan, section, elevation, always kind of like ways of identifying kind of your position or how things kind of connect and come together. So it's always been a way of welding that space and like imagining it. I think the term welding is completely like a it's an imaginary, isn't it? It's a way of kind of like speculating on what these forms might become. And yes, I just think it's such a crucial kind of skill to have. Often with my students, we even though the studio we run is digital native, I feel as though kind of getting them to kind of sketch and plan for even digital work, I think is very important, because it's the first kind of render that you can kind of create. It's the first kind of welding process that you can kind of have an interface with.
And another more like an observation which I sort of made today, and this was Ibiye ran a photogrammetry workshop today with around about 20 students, and I was really interested in the sort of photogrammetry process of taking multiple photos, and how much your own movement and your body moves in relation to the environment that you're in, and your body plays quite an active part in either moving in quite a structured way to take your photos to build up this image, or in a more sort of free flowing, almost like a kind of a dance-like movement that you might have in a sort of landscape. But then also thinking back to the exhibition next door, and the idea being that you come in at the top of a ramp and you're lowered down into the space, and how how the visitor is physically in relation to the work, again, is that it's a very sort of consciousness towards how the body relates to the environment and the position of the person in relation to the work. And I really love that. It becomes really sort of active and responsive to the space, and you have to move a lot, you know, in the exhibition. You sort of peer behind the textiles or move around the textiles, or even the benches. Ibiye wanted the benches to be lower than normal to sort of encourage a more relaxed, sort of laid back way of viewing the film. Like, there's a real consciousness that you paid towards all these little details, which I think is really great, really rewarding.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I've also, I don't know if this totally relates, but I've also become super aware of how my daughter kind of experiences things. I have a little 2-year-old, and I kind of also was thinking of her kind of running the way that she does in Freetown, but also kind of maybe running into the exhibition down the ramp or something. And I think this was also something, maybe that has to do with scale and size as well, like how a 2-year-old would kind of also get to experience this work. I think that's that was super important to me with the show too. Yeah.
Cool. Great. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for coming this evening. And just to offer a huge thanks, Ibiye, for that really insightful talk
Thank
tonight.
you for your questions as well. That's always just amazing. So yeah, I'm really grateful for the conversation. Like that's so rewarding for me. So thank you.
No, good.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thank you.